Why do some people seem genuinely supportive when you talk about your plans, but become noticeably colder once those plans begin to work? They may encourage you while you are struggling, listen to your ideas, and even tell you that you deserve success. Yet when you finally receive the promotion, build the business, improve your appearance, or become more confident, their attitude changes. The congratulations sound forced, the jokes become more personal, and every achievement is quickly followed by a reminder that you were lucky, had help, or have not really accomplished that much. It is tempting to think that these people suddenly became cruel, but the real explanation is often more complicated. Your success has changed the way they see themselves. As long as you were both struggling, there was no uncomfortable comparison. You shared the same complaints, the same limitations, and perhaps the same excuses. Once you began moving forward, however, your life became evidence that change was possible. You did not have to criticize them or boast about what you had achieved. The comparison appeared on its own, and this is where envy often begins. Friedrich Nietzsche understood envy not simply as wanting what another person possesses, but as a reaction to wounded pride and powerlessness. A person sees strength, courage, or achievement in someone else and feels unable to produce the same qualities within themselves. Because admitting this is painful, the mind searches for another explanation. The successful person must have cheated, become arrogant, abandoned their values, or sacrificed something that was not worth sacrificing. By reducing the value of the achievement, the envious person protects their own image without having to change their life. 2. Your success becomes a mirror. Success is uncomfortable because it creates a comparison, even when no comparison was intended. When someone close to you becomes more disciplined, more independent, or more successful, their progress can expose the gap between what you say you want and what you are actually willing to do. Imagine two friends who have complained for years about being unhappy at work. One of them continues to complain, but changes nothing. The other begins studying in the evenings, applies for new positions, and eventually leaves for a better opportunity. The second friend has not attacked the first one. They have not said, "You are lazy," or "You wasted your time." Yet their actions communicate something difficult. Leaving was possible. This is why success can feel like an accusation to people who are dissatisfied with themselves. Your discipline reminds them of their inconsistency. Your courage reminds them of the risks they avoided. Your progress makes their excuses more difficult to believe. As long as your goals remain plans, they do not threaten anyone. People are often comfortable supporting a dream that has not yet become real. They can praise your ambition because nothing has changed. But when your effort begins producing visible results, the situation becomes different. Your success is no longer an idea, it becomes proof, and proof is much harder to ignore. 3. Why envy often comes from people close to you. We usually expect envy from competitors or strangers, but it often appears most strongly among people who once saw themselves as your equals. A stranger's success may feel distant and irrelevant. The success of a sibling, friend, or colleague is much more personal because the comparison is easier to make. If someone grew up beside you, worked at the same company, studied in the same class, or began with similar opportunities, your progress can disturb the story they tell themselves about life. They may have believed that both of you would remain at roughly the same level. When you begin moving ahead, they are forced to explain why your paths have separated. The honest explanation may be that you made different choices, accepted discomfort, or continued working when they stopped. But honesty can be painful. It is emotionally easier to say that you had better connections, more luck, fewer responsibilities, or some hidden advantage. This does not mean that every friend who feels envy is a bad person. Envy is a normal human emotion. The important question is what someone does with it. A mature person can notice envy and use it as information. They may ask themselves what your success reveals about their own desires and what they could learn from you. An immature person does something different. Instead of using the discomfort to grow, they try to reduce the person who caused it. 4. When admiration becomes competition. Envy rarely begins as open hostility. At first, it can look like admiration. Someone follows your progress, asks questions, and appears interested in what you are building. But if admiration is mixed with insecurity, the relationship can slowly become competitive. The person may begin comparing every detail. If you achieve something, they immediately mention their own plans. If someone compliments you, they interrupt with a story about themselves. If your success becomes difficult to deny, they search for a way to make it seem less meaningful. They may say that you were simply in the right place at the right time. They may focus on what your achievement cost, rather than what it required. They may suggest that your new confidence is arrogance, or that your ambition has changed you for the worse. These comments are effective because they rarely sound openly hostile. They are often presented as honesty, concern, or humor. The person can hurt you while denying that any harm was intended. Nietzsche understood that people often reinterpret qualities they cannot match. If they feel incapable of becoming strong, they may decide that strength is vulgar. If they lack ambition, they may call ambition greed. If they fear risk, they may describe courage as irresponsibility. In this way, they avoid feeling inferior by declaring the thing they lack morally undesirable. 5. The signs of hidden envy. Because envy is socially embarrassing, most people hide it, including from themselves. It usually appears through patterns rather than direct statements. One common sign is that someone becomes more engaged with your failures than with your successes. When something goes wrong, they ask detailed questions, offer advice, and suddenly have plenty of time for you. When things are going well, their interest disappears. Another sign is the backhanded compliment. They praise you while quietly reducing the achievement. They may say, "You are doing surprisingly well," or "I could never spend that much time working," or "It is impressive, although you were always obsessed with success." They may also become unusually concerned that you are changing. Of course you are changing. Growth changes people. But in this context, "you have changed" often means you are no longer behaving in the way that made me comfortable. They may remind you of old mistakes at moments when you feel proud. They may make jokes about your ambitions, warn you not to become arrogant, or treat your confidence as if it were a character flaw. None of these behaviors proves envy by itself. The pattern matters. Does the person consistently reduce your achievements? Do they seem more relaxed when you are struggling? Do they support your goals in theory, but become uncomfortable when you make real progress? Over time, these reactions reveal more than their words. 6. Nietzsche's concept of ressentiment. One of Nietzsche's most important ideas was ressentiment, a form of resentment that develops when a person feels powerless to act directly. Instead of confronting their weakness or changing their situation, the person creates a moral explanation for why the thing they cannot achieve is actually bad. They do not simply say, "I am unable to become successful." They say, "Successful people are selfish." They do not say, "I am afraid to take risks." They say, "People who take risks are irresponsible." They do not admit, "I lack the courage to speak openly." They say, "Quiet obedience is a sign of goodness." This process allows the person to transform a feeling of inferiority into a feeling of moral superiority. They may have less influence, less discipline, or less freedom, but they can still tell themselves that they are better than the people who possess those qualities. This is why envy often appears as moral criticism. The envious person rarely says, "Your success makes me feel inadequate." Instead, they question your motives. They suggest that you care too much about money, attention, appearance, recognition, or power. Some of those criticisms may occasionally be valid. Success can make people arrogant, and ambition can become destructive. But when the criticism appears only after you begin progressing, and when it comes from someone who was comfortable with you while you were struggling, it may have less to do with your values than with their discomfort. 7. Why your failure can bring them relief. The idea that someone close to you may feel relieved by your failure is difficult to accept. but it explains many strange reactions. Suppose you start a business and it succeeds. A friend who has wanted to start one for years may feel increasingly uncomfortable around you. Your progress forces them to think about the time they have lost. If the business later fails, they may become warm and supportive again. This support may be genuine, but it may also contain relief. Your failure restores their belief that taking the risk would have been pointless. They no longer have to wonder whether fear prevented them from building something valuable. The same thing can happen with relationships, health, money, or personal confidence. When you improve, you challenge the other person's explanation of why improvement is impossible. When you fall, their worldview feels safe again. This is why some people appear almost energized by bad news. They suddenly become attentive, caring, and available. They may tell themselves that they are simply being a good friend, and sometimes they are, but their comfort around your suffering can also reveal that your weakness feels less threatening than your strength. They do not always want you destroyed. Often, they simply want you returned to a level where the comparison no longer hurts. 8. Why you should not make yourself smaller. When people notice this reaction, they often begin hiding their success. They stop sharing good news, pretend that their work is going badly, or make jokes that reduce their own achievements. They believe that if they appear smaller, the relationship will become comfortable again. This strategy can work, but the price is high. You preserve the relationship by preserving an outdated version of yourself. There is a difference between humility and self-erasure. Humility means understanding that success does not make you more valuable as a human being. Self-erasure means pretending that your work, discipline, and progress do not matter because someone else feels threatened by them. You are not required to boast, dominate every conversation, or turn your life into a performance, but you are also not required to apologize for improving. Healthy relationships can survive differences in success. A real friend may occasionally feel jealous, but they will not try to punish you for growing. They may struggle with comparison, yet still want good things for you. They will not need you to fail in order to feel secure. If a relationship only works when you remain confused, dependent, unsuccessful, or easy to control, then the relationship was never based on mutual respect. It was based on balance, and your growth disturbed that balance. 9. How to respond without becoming suspicious of everyone. Learning about envy can easily make a person paranoid. Once you begin looking for hidden hostility, every joke can sound like an insult, and every criticism can seem motivated by jealousy. That is not wisdom. It is another form of insecurity. Not everyone who disagrees with you envies you. Not everyone who becomes distant secretly wants you to fail. People have their own problems, changing priorities, and legitimate opinions. Sometimes criticism is useful, especially when it comes from someone who has consistently supported you and is willing to tell you the truth. The best approach is to observe repeated behavior rather than react to individual comments. Ask yourself whether the person can celebrate your progress without immediately reducing it. Notice whether they respect your boundaries and whether they support you only when you are weak. You do not need to accuse them of jealousy. In most cases, that conversation achieves nothing. A person who cannot admit envy to themselves will not admit it because you confront them. Instead, change the amount of access they have to your plans. Share important goals with people who have shown that they can handle your progress. Stop looking for validation from those who consistently minimize you. Maintain distance without creating unnecessary drama. The goal is not to punish anyone. It is to protect your direction. 10. The final lesson. Success does more than improve your circumstances. It changes your relationships because it changes the role you occupy within them. Some people will be inspired by your progress. Some will become more ambitious because they see what is possible. Others will feel left behind and will try to pull you back toward the version of yourself they understood. Nietzsche's lesson is not that everyone secretly hates you or that every relationship is a struggle for power. It is that people often judge strength through the filter of their own condition. What inspires one person can humiliate another. What looks like courage to someone ready to grow can look like arrogance to someone afraid to change. You do not need to hate the people who envy you. Their reaction usually reveals pain, frustration, and dissatisfaction with themselves. But understanding their pain does not mean allowing it to control your decisions. You can care about someone without accepting their attempts to diminish you. You can remain humble without pretending to be weak. You can listen to criticism without handing your confidence to people who benefit from your doubt. The people who truly care about you will not require you to remain unsuccessful so that they can feel comfortable. They will not need your failure to confirm their choices. They may struggle with comparison, as everyone does, but they will still want you to move forward. And when your progress makes someone colder, more critical, or more interested in seeing you fall, remember that your success may have revealed something that your failure allowed them to hide. Sometimes the clearest way to understand a relationship is not to watch how people treat you when you are struggling, but to watch what happens when you begin to win.